A confirmation about the audio, please. If the audio is clear and available, kindly confirm the same. Thank you. We shall be starting in a couple of moments. Kishan, for the doubts in geography, I would rather suggest to you that send me a mail and we'll take a look into it. Okay. So, hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Baiju's Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to the session of Environment and Ecology, where from today we shall be initiating the discussion for environment and ecology. And over the next 10 modules, we shall be taking a look into the various different portions relevant for your examination purposes. Now, environment and ecology, when it comes to the prelims examination, when it comes to the pattern of the questions which are asked, that is one of the subjects which is known to give frets and anxieties amongst many of the candidates. So, here, what we shall be doing is we shall be decluttering the entire particular subject, entire particular portion. We shall try to provide the relevant linkages with the other subjects as well, so that one gets an idea and an association factor as well. That, let's suppose you are studying about any particular area, any particular region, then you have to be able to decipher on your own that what kind of adaptations, what kind of general behavioral patterns that you would observe the animals and the plants to be indicating in any particular area. So, first of all, why is it that the study of environment and ecology is relevant for your examination, and how relevant it should be for your examination? How much attention and focus should you pay for this particular subject? Because when it comes to preparation, and here every candidate is quite logical in their approach when they think that we should address the big four subjects, that is the portion of polity, geography, history and economy, and the rest of the portions they might not be that very relevant. But environment is one of those areas and one of those topics which keeps on finding its relevance each and every year as it is being preferred by the prelims paper setters in general. Now, here, when we talk about the number of questions asked, because after all, that is something which decides the relevance of a subject. So, the number of questions asked in the prelims, here, in the prelims, you can expect close to around 12 to 15 questions to be asked directly in the prelims examination. So that is why the study is relevant, because out of these 12 to 15 questions, now why I have said 12 to 15, because this year it was comparatively lesser, but in general it is prevailing in the range of around 14, 15, or sometimes 16 as well, sometimes 13 as well. So that is the expected range that you can expect UPSC to put forward. Now, out of these 12 to 15 questions, you will find the distribution here in such a way that around 6 to 7 questions are asked from the static portion. Static portion means the portions which you read as a contextual matter, the portions that you read for your conceptual clarity in general. So 6 to 7 questions are asked directly from that, and around 5 to 6 questions other than that are from dynamic or current affairs portion, or the portion of current affairs. Okay. So that is where the remaining questions will be asked from. Now, the problem which arises is that nowadays what UPSC has started doing is UPSC has started putting in certain trivia based questions, certain fact based questions. And due to that, majority of the candidates, they shape their preparation based upon only one or two of those trivia based questions. Even this year, if you take a look at the questions asked by and asked in the portion of environment and ecology, I'm sure you would have looked at the discussion that we have had on the YouTube channel as well about the questions of environment and ecology. So there you would find a trend that yes, there are two or three very typical, very fact-based questions which you cannot expect yourself to be familiar with unless and until that you have watched certain documentaries, unless and until you are exposed to that particular fact. But does not mean that you base your entirety of the preparation for the rest of the subject only based upon those factual trivia, because that is where you will find that those candidates who actually end up clearing the examination, they will not commit major mistakes in this static portion. One or two errors here and there will happen, but remaining of the questions they will get it correct. And if you are well versed with current affairs, here also you will get around 80% of the questions correct. So if you have followed the static portion religiously, meticulously, you have covered the entirety of the portion of the static. And if you are familiar with the portion of current affairs on a day-to-day basis, where any new topic of current affairs doesn't stump you, doesn't bowl you out immediately, then here also by application of logic, 60 to 70% or 70 to 80% of even the dynamic questions you will be able to solve. So here, ideally, after coverage of these modules and by covering of the current affairs as well, you can expect yourself to be able to solve close to around 10 to 12 questions correctly. 10 to 12 questions you'll be able to attain from here. So this is not a small deal. For a smaller subject like environment, if you are able to secure 20 to 24 marks out of environment itself, then remaining of the larger subjects will be able to carry you through in the prelims examination. That won't be much of a hassle. Now here, this is relevant even for your mains exam. The relevance of environment is not only restricted to your prelims, it is also something very important for your mains exam as well. So when we talk about the mains exam, here in the mains paper and in the mains exam, the questions from environment are asked in GS paper 3. In GS paper 3. That is where you get subjective questions. That is where you find the subjective questions to be asked. Now, out of this, in GS paper 3, generally you get close to around questions, or roughly around 3 to 4 or 4 to 5 questions in general, and they range from around 40 to 45 marks. and that is again substantial bit. In GS paper 3, generally you will find that the amount of marks that the candidates are able to fetch, that is quite on the side of the average. They are not able to secure very good marks in GS paper 3. It is generally in GS 2 where people are able to secure good marks, and GS paper 4. But GS paper 3 is where you will find some average performances. So in that case, if you are good in environment, easily you will be able to cross that 100 mark barrier when it comes to the total marks that you attain in GS paper 3. Because out of the total marks or the total weightage of GS paper 3, which is around 250 marks, if you are able to secure around 110, 115, that automatically puts you in the toppers list. And that is something which should be your aim. And for that, you cannot compromise on these easy, low hanging fruit which is offered by environment. Now, when we are studying about environment, when we are studying about ecology, here another point of concern is that what is it that we should study to keep the preparation relevant for examination? You have various different materials which flood the market, which are very, very common in the markets, which every candidates will buy as a force, or will buy as a methodology, where my friends are also buying this book, so I will also buy this book. So many of the times we are not even clear what we need to study in this. And when you ask any random candidate after 2 to 3 months of their preparation that what is it that you want to study in environment, they will list you out that I will learn all the national parks, I will learn all the wildlife sanctuaries, I will learn the critically endangered species, and that is it. But that is not even 1%, or that is not even required for the examination purposes. This is where the misconception actually starts. This is where we are unable to understand the pattern of this examination. And why does this happen? Understand that. Let's suppose you have 20 different questions or 15 different questions which are asked. Out of that, one question is factual, let's suppose, and is based upon any of the species. Now, for example, this year in 2023, UPSC had asked a question that which of the organisms actually uses a stick as a kind of a toothpick, and thereby uses that stick to eat the various different insects and ants in the trees. And the answer would be orangutan. Now, that was such a random question, which obviously in our classes when we recommend the various different documentaries, and I hope if you are aware that in the portion of environment and ecology, I generally refer to the candidates that please do watch certain documentaries. That is very important for your preparation in the changing pattern. It might seem a kind of an unconventional suggestion, because in this era or in this area of civil services, generally people don't suggest any visual aid. People would suggest to you five different kinds of books, five different types of sample papers, five different types of questions that keep on rectifying that till you excel. But this is where I will suggest to you that have a departure from the normal. Normalcy, when we talk about in environment and ecology, that is simply involving the kind of a rectification and rote learning of the text, which is not going to help you. We will be handing out, or I will give you the suggestions for various different types of documentary features that you can watch, and that is going to further enhance your level of understanding, your ability to correlate and interrelate materials of different topics, different areas, and then extract the finer points. For example, amongst the documentaries that we had suggested in the portion of environment and ecology, you had three questions from environment which came directly from that particular area, orangutan being one of them. Now, where the problem starts is, let's suppose an individual candidate who is not aware where the questions are coming from or what the pattern of civil services, whether it has got a trend or not. What they will do is they will take a look at this factual question, and then they will base their entire preparation on that factual question. Now, if a question on orangutan has come, that how orangutan consumes food, you will find, and trust me, ask your fellow friends and your fellow competitors. They will also adhere to the same fact that what we rather do is we will end up learning all those various different facts about the different animals, what is the gestation period for the various animals, and that is how we'll secure marks. But UPSC might end up changing the type of questions completely next year. Couple of years back, UPSC in the portion of environment and ecology had asked a question about elephants and the gestation period when it comes to birthing a new one. How is it that, or how long does the pregnancy last? So that was the question which UPSC asked. Now, immediately, all the various different test papers, all the various different subject materials, you would find that they would talk about how much time does a camel take to get born, what is the gestation period for a cheetah, gestation period for an elephant, and people would rote learn that, rectify that. UPSC did not repeat that question again, or even that type of question again. So, what is the use of chasing the previous year questions when UPSC frequently keeps on changing the goalpost? So, what should be the approach? Approach should be to develop your basics to the deepest particular source or deepest particular level as is possible. Develop the portion that you are aware of, or develop the basic portion with which you get the tools to handle or take care of any kind of variation. So, here, what you should do rather is prepare the subject. Now, what I will be doing is we'll be dividing the subject into the static portion and into the dynamic portion. Now, for the static portion, what we would cover in the portion of static area is that basically we are going to cover the portions including ecosystem, biomes, ecological succession, right? Then we are going to talk about the various different types of ecosystems, for example, wetlands, mangroves, corals, okay, ecological pyramids, biogeochemical cycle, then pollutions, types of pollution that we have, the causes, the kinds of disease that various different types of contaminations lead into. So that is also something that we are going to cover. Then after that, we are going to cover about biodiversity, the different types of biodiversity hotspots that we have. All those factors we are going to cover here. We are going to cover the factor associated, something which is in between the portion of static and dynamic, that is climate change. Now, climate change, including what is it that the impact of deforestation will have, what do we understand by factors such as, let's say, ocean acidification, all those factors will be covered. Now, here, what we shall try to inculcate is that in the later portions of the module coverage, and also wherever possible in the in between as well, we shall be trying to correlate it, interrelate it with the portion of the current affairs, with the portion which is relevant for your dynamic area as well. So here we shall be taking a look into international organizations. For example, when we will study about the different types of pollution, we will also be talking about waste management. So, there, the new legislations, the new amendments which have been brought about, national legislations and amendments. For example, what are the amendments which have been brought about when it comes to e-waste handling? What are the amendments brought about in the plastic waste management? What are the amendments brought about in Wildlife Conservation Act? What are the various different changes which have been brought about in the Biodiversity Act? All those various changes which have been happening and which are happening, that is something where we shall try to interrelate, correlate it with the portion earlier. So, organizations, legislations, amendments, conventions, right, and conferences. These are the portions which we are going to cover. So, here in the first few modules, we shall try to take a look into the basic portion, the static portion. And for example, wherever, let's say, we come across the portion of mangroves. Now, in the portion of mangroves, we shall also be talking about Mangrove Alliance for Climate, which is very much a part of current affairs. We shall also be talking about the Mishti scheme, which is very much a part of current affairs. So, we shall try to form a correlation so that it is easier for you to consume that knowledge and information as well. Ideally, I would be expecting that majority of you or most of you would have covered the portion of geography, or at least would have had some idea about the subject of geography. How many of us have not studied the portion of geography? Okay, most of you have done this. Good. So, here, when most of you would have done the portion of geography, you would have understood the climatic realities and the climatic conditions, the conditions of salinity, the conditions of water prevalent in various parts of the country. And that is something, various parts of the world as well. And that is something which is going to come to your immense help and aid in understanding this subject as well. This is where the subject has got a greater correlation, and how that correlation or why that correlation exists is something that we will come to know as we start initiating the discussion of the topic. As we get into a couple of modules, you will be much more familiar with the various different types of interconnections that it will have. Okay. And Akshaya, suggest the names of the documentaries. I would do so. So then comes the other important area that oftentimes gives a significant amount of anxiety is the materials or the books to be covered. Materials or book list. So for this, I would recommend you that in general, following the sessions, the class PPTs, along with the additional reading materials which are provided to you, that is something which will improve the basic understanding. Okay, the class PPT plus additional reading materials, additional reading materials, right? That should be sufficient for having your basics very clear. Basics about international organizations, basics about how these conventions operate, what are the amendments, what are the various different factors relevant in the present day and age. All of that basics will be clear here itself. Then after that, here, along with that, I want you to augment the preparation with the portion of current affairs. Now, in the portion of current affairs, what are the areas that you need to address? So, here, first of all, newspaper reading, I'm sure all of you are following as a kind of a must. Newspaper reading is a must. Plus, go for Down to Earth magazine. Now, this Down to Earth magazine is something which is going to help you not only in the subject of environment ecology, it is also going to help you in the subject of geography, it is also going to help you in the portion of essay. So it has got a wider relevance to help you understand the various different laws, legislations, actions, norms, success stories, etc., being observed across the entirety of the country. So Down to Earth magazine is something which is very, very relevant, and this will form your portion of current affairs. Plus, other than that, you can also take a look at certain documentaries, docuseries or documentaries. Can we read the book that you have provided? Yes, you can go for that as well. So, but ideally, I would suggest that attend the session so that you are able to analyze and understand which are the important areas, which are not so very important areas, so that accordingly you can concentrate or put your adequate attention in each of these. So, in the case of the docu-series, I would suggest to you that look out for Our Planet, right? Which is available on YouTube as well. And it is a 10 episode series where you will find that it is narrated by one of the great environmentologists, that is David Attenborough. So, that is something which is going to help you significantly understand the forest ecosystem, the oceanic ecosystem, the frozen areas of the planet, the grassland ecosystem. It will help you understand that quite significantly, migration patterns, and so on. The new series which has come in for Our Planet, it handles specifically the portion of migration. Then, other than that, you can also take a look at our national parks. Now, this Our National Parks is narrated by the ex-US President Barack Obama. And here, please don't have the expectation that there will be a listing of all the national parks of the country. And here you will be able to learn this. This is not about India per se. This is about the global environmental and ecological condition where protected areas, larger protected areas across the globe, they are basically handled in this. So that is something that can also be used to enrich your information. Now, it is from here that you find many questions, or at least two to three questions, being directed in the prelims. So, don't think about it as an additional burden. Just take a look at it only when you have some leisure time. When you have some leisure time where you don't want to indulge yourself again into the thick pages of the book. So, at that point of time, you can take a break in this form and you can always analyze any of these and thereby gain a lasting information, a lasting set of knowledge as well. Okay, so that is your material list which is required. Now, in this particular preparation, the portion of current affairs gains mighty importance, but that will never come into fruition if this area is weak. If the basics are weak, then the portion of current affairs will never be understood. For example, recently you had a kind of change, a variation which was brought in, amendment which had been brought in into the Biodiversity Act. Now, unless and until you understand what this Biodiversity Act is, why this has been brought about, what is the purpose behind it, what are the international conventions and protocols for that Biodiversity Act, you'll never be able to appreciate what are the changes that the government has brought. Unless and until you want to be one of those candidates who simply, whatever comes in the newspaper or whatever comes in the current affairs, you will simply rote learn it regardless of whatever its linkages are. If you are that candidate, fair enough. But ideally, if you want to do well, even in the mains examination, even in the prelims examination, first of all, cover these basics in as much detail as possible, then move over to the portion of current affairs which you have to follow religiously, and then augment your sources of information from any book that you like, or the docu-series, or any other source of material that you like. But I would suggest to you, don't go for a very elaborate study material for this subject. This is a dynamic subject in nature where the ability to revise it multiple times is going to provide you with a certain edge. Now, Kishan, short notes for quick revision. Yes, you can develop the short notes, and those short notes should ideally consist of. Ideally, I would suggest for all the basics that we have covered, you can or we will be covering. You can concise the entirety of the portion in 3 to 4 or 4 to 5 pages individually, and thereby that should be something which you can revise very frequently, let's say on a fortnightly basis. And then eventually you have to look into the portion of the area of current affairs and augment your notes accordingly, elaborate upon your notes accordingly, and that is something which is going to help you out. Okay, any doubts that we have, feel free to ask. The PPT is Sri Devi will be provided in the section, it is the link would be present to you in the main portal itself. Okay. Other than that, any doubts that we have before we initiate the discussion for the topic? Okay, good. So, Asif, I have made notes from tablet. Okay, fair enough, Asif. No issues. So, in the session, when you are attending the session, any new source of information or any new area that you come across, you can add it to your note or think about it as a kind of a revision aspect. Uh, Main syllabus is very limited for ecology. Yes, roughly around 45, at max 50 marks questions will be asked. Sometimes what is done is an act, an amendment, a legislation which has been brought in uh, as a new factor. That is something which is asked immediately. Sometimes what is also done is that let's suppose in international conference has taken place, conference of parties, when it happens, so there a direct question is picked up from. Then sometimes you will find that you cross utilization of the portion of current affairs as well as the basics. So for example, what is the concept of wise use in wetlands? What do we understand by Ramsar sites? So those kinds of questions are also available. Okay. Asif, yes, you can read the books which have been provided by us. Okay. Now let us initiate the discussion for this topic. So, here, first of all, let us understand what this entire subject and the study of this subject is about. What is it that we as a candidate are expected to know when UPSC asks us question from this? Now, here, very briefly, let me tell you what is it that UPSC does, or how is it that UPSC paper has evolved. So, before that, a couple of questions. I have books from Byju's R. Gopalan. Is it enough for prelims and PPT also along with monthly magazine? Yes. See, the basic augmented with current affairs, more than sufficient. And Sajan, same is the case with you as well. See, for all of you, I would suggest to you that attend the sessions, and after attending the sessions, you automatically will gain an idea what is relevant, what is not relevant. We will be discussing certain relevant portions. So, upon your first revision, you can augment the revision process with the portion of the PPTs along with the books that you have, where the Raj Gopalan book that you have, only the important areas you can flip through, browse through, and then with full concentration you can immerse yourself in the study of current affairs. Okay. Now, I was telling you about the trend that UPSC has been following and what is it that UPSC holds as an expectation from us candidates. So basically, it was not up till 2013 where environment and ecology as a separate branch of subject would be studied. Mostly you had a couple of questions from environment which would be asked, two or three questions from environment would be asked prior to 2013 as well. But then those questions could be addressed easily by studying the portion what we would study as biogeography, where you would study in detail about forest, soils, etc. But from 2014 onwards, UPSC actually went for a marked change. From 2014 onwards, UPSC started asking questions, and large number of questions, particularly from the portion of environment and ecology, particularly channelized from this particular area. Now, when UPSC started asking large number of questions from there, that is where candidates began to read this as a different subject. Candidates started accumulating material for this particular subject. So here, the genesis has been biogeography. The origin of this subject is from biogeography, where based upon the physical parameters of the geographical features that you have, there you get to understand what is the impact on biosphere, and that would be relevant preparation. But then the channelization in the form of current affairs, international conventions, organizations, etc., that started to happen from 2014. Now, here, where is it that your information or your idea of environment and ecology should stem from? Where is it that it should originate from? So, when we talk about this entire subject, it deals with the living species, that is, the flora and fauna in any particular region. That is what this subject deals with. Now, here, the living species, their existence, their survival, that is dependent on many different factors. For example, when we talk about the atmosphere, now, what are the conditions and the factors of atmosphere which can influence the living conditions, the life of any other individual plant or animal? So here, very easily, you can summarize this to the conditions of temperature, the temperature that is experienced in any particular area, the amount of rainfall, amount of rainfall. Isn't it? Depending upon what is the temperature experienced in an area, you have different kinds of species which will exist in that region. For example, when we talk about, let's say, any kind of an animal such as, let's say, elephant. Now, elephants are large animals. You cannot expect the elephants to exist or to roam around when it comes to Greenland or the polar areas. You cannot expect the elephants to do so. Similarly, when you talk about the smaller species, or let's suppose talk about any plant species, let's suppose a banyan tree. Now, banyan tree is something that you experience or you witness significantly in India, but reduce the temperature. Will you expect the presence of banyan tree in the region, let's say, of Siberia or the northern portion of Greenland? Obviously not, because their temperature handling capacity is different. Then, same is the case with the amount of rainfall. Now, for example, you expect various species having their own requirement of water. When you expect a particular species, let's suppose you take the case of a crocodile, or you take the case, let's assume, of again an elephant. Can an elephant survive in a desert area where there is no water? Obviously not. So, water is also a kind of a limiting factor, and that is provided by amount of precipitation. Then, when we talk about hydrosphere, that is the water in itself, whether the water is fresh or whether the water is salty and saline, right? Fresh water or saline water. Saline water. Now, you have the saltwater crocodiles, which are amongst the largest species of crocodiles, which will be able to exist only in saline water. And then you have gharials, the smaller versions of alligators, who will exist in fresh water. You have certain species of riverine dolphins which can exist only in fresh water. So, depending upon the salt content, you have the variation in terms of the types of species which can inhabit a region. Similarly, when we talk about, let's say, the temperature of water, temperature, so that is also a determining factor. In very cold water conditions, you will have certain specific kind of species like seals, which have a fatty layer above them. They can exist very easily. You cannot expect a normal fish that you find in Bay of Bengal to be able to exist even in the region of Antarctica, can you? Because the temperature will change. Same is the case with the lithosphere as well. The land types, the salinity of the soil, all those end up becoming a kind of a determining factor. Now, all these determining factors, they end up influencing the species, the kind of species, be it of animals, be it of plants, which reside in an area, which live in an area. And that constitutes what we refer to as the biosphere. So, biosphere is one of those systems of the planet which constitutes of all the living species, including animals, including plants, which inhabit the planet. And in this particular subject, you are expected to know about this biosphere. You are expected to know the behavioral patterns that this biosphere indicates, and the various different norms and various different events which are influencing this biosphere adversely, and what can be done to provide a kind of a change. So that is your expectation that UPSC holds out for you. So any piece of information that you come across, if it does influence the biosphere, if it does impact the biosphere, that is one of those areas that you should be immediately aware of. That is one of those areas that you should aim to cover. Okay. Now, after this, let us initiate the discussion for the first module. Now, in the first module, we shall be discussing the portion of ecosystem. We shall be discussing the portion of biotic, abiotic factors, the food chain, the food web, ecological pyramids. That is something that we are going to discuss. Now, out of that, for your prelims portion, almost the entirety of the portion is relevant, has been asked directly or indirectly in the prelims previously. For your mains portion, the idea or the portion of, let's say, ecological pyramids, the kinds of adaptations that the various species indicate, that is going to be relevant for your mains portion. So let us proceed with the portion of ecosystem. What do we understand when we talk about ecosystem? So ecosystem is something which is used in general English parlance as well, is something that you and I use on a daily English language conversation as well. So, what do you understand by ecosystem? So, living community of plants and animals in any area together with the non-living components of the environment such as soil, air, and water, that constitutes the ecosystem for that organism. For any organism, it will have its own ecosystem. Any region will end up indicating its own ecosystem. Okay, any region that you consider, it will have its own particular ecosystem. So here, when we talk about an ecosystem, it is a combination of living and non-living components. Living components as well as the factor of non-living components. It is going to be a combination of those. For example, in any particular region, let's suppose you have various different types of herbivores, various different types of carnivores. Herbivores are the ones which will consume the plant based food, right? Carnivores who will consume the flesh and the meat. So they will also influence what kind of species can exist in an area. So ecosystem is primarily driven by the living and the non-living components. Okay. Now, here, when we talk about the components of ecosystem, it can ably be divided into biotic and abiotic factors. Biotic factors here includes the living components. So whether the species that we are concerned about, whether those species are producers, consumers, or decomposers, right? Whether they are producing the food directly, whether they are consuming, or what are the types of species which are consuming the food, what are the types of species which are producing the food, how is it that the food is then particularly, let's say, decomposed. That is one of the important factors which determines the characteristic of an ecosystem. Okay. And then when we talk about abiotic factors, rain, light, wind, temperature, soil type, mineral type, topography, that is whether it is a rocky area, sandy area, it is covered with a thick amount of sediments, etc. That is also a non-living component. That is what is depicted by the edaphic factor. Edaphic factor here refers to something associated with the feature of the soil, something associated with the feature of the ground. So that is again a non-living component. So, one by one, what we will do is we'll analyze these factors. We'll start, first of all, with the coverage of biotic factors, the living factors which are prevalent in our environment around us, which influences the life around us quite significantly. So, first of all, when we take a look at the biotic factors in any particular environment, in any particular ecosystem, the prime role is played by the producer community. And when we say producer community, these are the species which are able to manufacture their own food. Okay. Manufacture their own food does not mean that I have put the grains of cereals in the pressure cooker on my own, I have lit up the stove on my own, and thereby I have produced rice or dal on my own. No. The ability to produce food, right? How you are able to produce food. So that is what is composed or what is done by the producer community. Now, those who are able to produce food on their own, they are also referred to as autotrophs. Okay. Autotrophs. Auto means they themselves are sufficient for the production of food requirement. Now, in the case of autotrophs as well, here another factor that you have to understand is the basic one, that in any particular ecosystem, in any particular region, the total amount of food which is produced, total amount of organic component which is produced, that in a way ends up dictating that not only the number of species but also the type of species which can survive in that area. All of that is dependent upon the total food produced. In an area, let's suppose if you have very little amount of plants, obviously the animals, they won't be able to consume these plants, so the animal population themselves will be very less, isn't it? Because consider the smallest of them, smallest of the organisms, directly or indirectly they are dependent on this producer community. They will consume what the producers end up producing, right? Now, even these producers, they are classified into two types: the producers who produce with the help of light energy, for example, the plants that we come across on a day to day basis. Now, they produce food or they produce organic component how? With the utilization of light. Because when the light falls upon them, and we are talking about the solar rays, when the solar rays they do fall upon them, after that, they utilize those solar rays along with carbon dioxide in order to carry out photosynthesis. And after that photosynthesis is carried out, that is when oxygen along with the other organic components they are also produced, isn't it? So those particular producers who are able to produce food in the existence or due to the presence of light, they are referred to as photoautotrophs. So here the producers producing food due to light energy. That is what is photoautotroph. Now here, when the solar rays fall upon the surface, now solar rays, they consist of a variety of wavelength, right? Solar rays overall, I hope we are aware that solar light is referred to as a kind of a white light, and it constitutes of a variety of various different wavelengths. So here you would have studied about Vibgyor in terms of the different types of light patterns which are received. You would have studied about Vibgyor, that is violet, indigo, blue, yellow, orange, or green as well, and then eventually red, isn't it? So not all the rays emitted by the sun are utilized by the plants. The plants are able to utilize only a select portion of the wavelength emitted by the sun. So if, let's say, in this graphical representation, if you observe, this indicates the various wavelengths that the solar rays they produce. You can observe that here you have the UV rays, ultraviolet. Here, this section, you have the infrared. So these are not utilizable by the plants in such. But then the plants are able to utilize a significantly major portion of the solar rays, and that is what is referred to as photosynthetically active radiation. That is what is known as photosynthetically active radiation. So, this is the portion of solar rays which is to be utilized by the plants in order to carry out photosynthesis. Okay, so obviously, the plants won't be able to utilize the portion of ultraviolet or infrared rays. Now, when you have these autotrophs, they will produce some organic matter. Organic matter can be produced, let's say, in the form of a flower, let's say, in the form of a fruit, let's say, in the form of new leaves, and those leaves will be consumed by, let's say, deers. Deers will get that energy. Now, that energy will be consumed by tigers who will consume the deers. And that is how the energy transfer will take place. But event or in the initial stage, you need some production. Some organic matter needs to be consumed for that energy, isn't it? So the total amount of organic compound produced by the producer community, that is what is referred to as the gross primary productivity. So when you talk about the gross primary productivity, GPP, gross primary productivity, that is total organic compounds produced by the autotrophs. That is your gross primary productivity. Now, here, let us talk about a basic concept here. When we talk about the total amount of organic compounds produced, now those organic compounds overall, will all of them be consumable by the plants themselves, or will all of them be available for consumption for the rest of the species? No. Let's suppose a plant produces 100 units of organic compound. Let's assume. Now, will all those 100 units be available for consumption for the organisms? No. And rightly pointed out, it won't be available. Why? Because whatever the plants are producing, some amount of that energy the plants would also require it for themselves. Why? For example, when you have the plants carrying out the process of photosynthesis, that also requires some amount of energy. And eventually, I hope we are aware that the plants also carry out the process of respiration. And what do we mean by the process of respiration? They will be consuming oxygen and they will be producing carbon dioxide as a byproduct, which is a reverse of photosynthesis. So the plants also carry out respiration, especially during the night time. So for that also, they will be required to spend some energy, isn't it? So out of the 100 units provided or produced, overall, let's suppose our number of units are utilized for respiration. That means the available units for the rest of the population, for rest of the species is what? 100 minus R, isn't it? So that is what is available for the rest of the world. And that is what is known as the net primary productivity, or NPP. This is what is GPP. Then you have net primary productivity. Now, this net primary productivity is basically the total amount of energy which is available for the rest of the world for consumption. So, this will be GPP minus R, energy consumed for respiration. by producers. Okay, so this NPP is the one which is available for the rest of the world. Okay, so that is your total amount of productivity being carried out. Now, also, you have to understand that not all the production is carried out by photoautotrophs themselves. You have a significant portion of chemoautotrophs, mostly comprising of microbes such as Nitrosomonas, Nitrobacter, etc. Now, these are referred to as chemoautotrophs. What are chemotrophs or chemoautotrophs? They are able to manufacture food by utilizing the chemical composition around them and carrying out the oxidation of the chemicals around them. So they are able to generate energy. How? By utilization of chemicals around them, and that utilization includes carrying out oxidation of the chemicals to produce energy. Okay, carrying out oxidation of the chemicals to produce energy. Now, here you would be interested to know, and I'm sure most of you would already be knowing this, that the genesis of life, the origin of life on the planet, where did it happen? It happened underwater, it happened under the oceans. Now, how is it that life came upon Earth? How many of us are not aware about that? Or how many of us have the perception that life was created one fine day when God had his magic wand and eventually life was produced on the earth? Most of you would be aware. Very good. Okay. A couple of us are unaware. Okay. So when we talk about the genesis of life, genesis of life basically happened underneath the oceans. When the planet started getting created, or when the planet was created immediately, at that point of time, you had the large swaths of the planet and large sections covered underwater. In fact, at one point of time, you had the entirety of the planet covered underwater. Now, in these early oceans, which were dominated by carbon compounds, that is where you had the earliest life produced in the form of cyanobacterium or some kinds of blue green bacterium as well. Now, they were chemotrophs initially. They would basically harvest the carbon compounds and carbon dioxide present around them, carry out the oxidation of them, produce oxygen as a byproduct, and also end up producing energy. Now, that energy, when they started producing that surplus, so that energy was utilized to reproduce. And that is how the species they started reproducing and the species they started to come into existence. So chemoautotrophs, they have always been very significant members and portions of the producer community, but largely you will find them to be present in the microbial structure in the form of small microbes. So genesis of life, origin of life, that happened underwater, under the oceans. You had chemotrophs, autotrophs in cyanobacteria, and blue green bacteria. So that is how they end up reproducing. Now, majority of these chemotrophs, you'll find them to be present underneath the soil, in the soil layers, underneath the deeper portions of the water, at the depths where the light is not available. So majority of them will be found in those portions where light is not easily available. That is something you have to keep in mind. Now, then when we come to the consumers are basically another important portion of the living community and the living component of an ecosystem. They end up determining the type, the nature of the ecosystem in itself. So when we talk about the consumers, they themselves are classified into herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, detritivores. What are these? Herbivores, they will consume the plants, the producers directly. Carnivores will consume the herbivores. Omnivores, they are the ones who can consume both plants as well as the animals. And then you have detritivores who will consume the dead organic matter or the decaying organic matter. They are the detritivores, because detritivores, the term comes from the terminology detritus. Detritus. What is the meaning of detritus? Let me see if we are aware. What is the meaning of detritus in general? Small fragments, dead matter, waste. Yes, more or less all of you are to the point. So you have dead or decaying organic matter which has been broken up into the small fragments. So you can talk about it as small fragments of dead organic matter. Okay. Now, if I ask you a simple question, that out of herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores, which of them do you think will be much more resilient to the various threats to the ecosystem? Where, let's say, the plant species are damaged or the animal species are damaged. Out of the herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores, which will be much more resilient to the threats that an ecosystem faces? Very good. Avni, Kishan, perfect. Manshu, good. So basically, always omnivores will be much more resilient, and the reason behind them is very simple. Why they would be much more resilient is because they have a diversified food source. They are not restricting their food source to only the living organisms, living components, or let's say the plant matter or only the animal matter. So the more you are able to diversify your source of energy, more resilient you will be, and there will be a greater chance for survival which will also be initiated. Okay. Now, Indrapreet, you have a question that in monthly magazine of Byju's, Down to Earth is covered. Do we still need to cover Down to Earth separately? I would want you to go through it in areas where you feel that you have any additional source of information. Down to Earth is an easy magazine to cover, my dear friends. It is not like a Frontline or an EPW, which will be very voluminous. So go through the portion of Down to Earth. It is a good read, it is an interesting read. From Down to Earth, see, the moment you approach, and again I would repeat it, I hope that you open up your ears for these 5 minutes, because in every session I keep on repeating this and still I find the same kind of questions being asked. The moment you stop approaching the portion of newspaper or magazines as a source of only current affairs, that is the moment when your true development will happen as a civil services aspirant. That is what will differentiate you from those who keep on aspiring for the exams and those who clear the exam with very good marks and very good rank. What do I mean by that is that newspaper and magazines that you come across, they are not only your source of current affairs. If you treat them only as a source of current affairs, then analysis, newspaper analysis, magazine analysis, the gist is more than sufficient. But that is not why UPSC wants you to study newspapers. I hope everybody is able to listen to that. That newspaper reading is not done, magazine reading is not done only for extracting key pointers which will help me in prelims or in mains. It will help you develop your perspective, first of all. Secondly, you come across many examples, case studies, success stories, failures, issues which can damage the environment, agricultural productivity, economic damage, and benefit eventually as well. So, that larger perspective, let's suppose you have a particular case. Let me give you an example why I always tell people to read it on their own, first of all. Let's suppose in the Down to Earth magazine, there is an article which talks about a particular farmer in Haryana carrying out certain methodologies of organic farming, thereby being able to augment their produce. Now, that article will also cover what are the various different crops that the farmer used to grow, what are the issues that the farmer would face. Now, in the current affairs magazine, any current affairs magazine in the world, what portions will be covered or extracted from that article? How organic farming will augment the production, what are the different methodologies of organic farming, the government scheme, that's it. But when it comes to gaining a perspective, that what are the issues, the ability to write a 250-word answer is not gained by reading those point wise bullet framing which is given in these magazines, in these analysis. Okay, but still, I would leave it to your own wise decision, because now you are adult enough to take your own decisions. I would leave it to your own judgment and your own independent thought process. Decide what is more relevant to succeed in the prelims or to eventually gain a very good rank. If you just want to be one of those candidates who succeeds in the prelims, keeps on trying it again and again, fair enough. Ratify the portion of monthly magazine, more than sufficient. If you want to be one of those candidates whose answer writing is also top notch, whose ability to express opinion on any matter is also top notch, you will have to do something which is slightly uncommon. And that majority of the almost all the toppers, you will find they have the same trait. They read these firsthand, and then you can revise it from the magazines, from the analysis, anything. But first hand reading is relevant. I hope that is taken in a positive aspect. Okay, now here, coming back to the topic, now when we talk about the consumers, then another very important role is played by the decomposers as well. Now, the decomposers are the ones who break up the decaying matter, the dead organic matter, and eventually they return it into the soil. Now, the process of decomposition, generally, all of us would have witnessed decomposition at some or the other stages in our life. And how do you witness decomposition? You would witness decomposition basically by what? Any food material which is left outside after, and you leave it outside itself. After a few days, or after, let's say, a few hours, you will observe a foul stench starts coming in. Then, if it is left just like that, in the case of the garbage, trash, etc., you would observe slowly and steadily, you would observe small insects, worms, they start creeping up. Then, after that, you will observe that the color in itself changes, it secretes some liquids, and then eventually, after a long period of time, it is not even identifiable that which organic matter was there in the first place. So, that process of decomposition, it is consisted of various different stages and various different subparts. So it is divided into five different processes and portions. First of all, you have the fragmentation. Fragmentation is carried out. Now, Then you have the process of leaching. Then after that, you have the process of catabolism. Then after that, you have the process of humification. Then after that, you have the process of mineralization. Now we'll take a look at each of these. But before that, from your own general experience, if I ask you, under what conditions do you experience the food to get decomposed or degraded very quickly? Because in our day to day circumstances and our day to day life, it is the food that we handle, and it is the decomposition of food that we come across very frequently. So, what are the various different conditions where do you think that decomposition will be carried out at a quicker pace? Generally, you would observe that if you keep a food in, let's say, any airtight container, decomposition won't be carried out, right? Availability of moisture, very good, which has less shelf life. Okay. I'm talking about the outside conditions. So, when we talk about the outside conditions which are conducive for decomposition, one will be the moist condition. For example, in this season, rainy season, you leave anything outside for a few hours, immediately it will go bad, isn't it? Then, other than that, warm temperature, perfect. Slightly warm temperature, there also materials they start going bad. Whereas in colder conditions, in the lack of moisture, materials are preserved perfectly. So, for decomposers, the conditions which are very important are basically warmer temperature and availability of moisture. Okay, availability of air as well. So it is in the presence of these components and in presence of these conditions where you will find the process of decomposition to be carried out. That is why generally in colder areas, in frozen areas, the organic materials they are preserved as it is. You would have come across the story where or the various different articles as well, where the people who trek Mount Everest, who climb Mount Everest, now in that process or in that journey, they come across many different dead bodies, etc., which are perfectly preserved there for 50, 60, 70 years almost. In certain cases, even more than that. But the same case won't be observed for, let's say, a dead body which is or a dead organism which is present on the sea level. They will immediately get decomposed, isn't it? So, similarly, when we talk about an absolute dry condition, there also rate of decomposition is slow. So, decomposition requires certain conditions to be fulfilled. Now, what is fragmentation? When we refer to the term fragmentation, it is basically breaking of any organic component, the dead organic component, into multiple smaller portions. This is carried out by the small worms that you have, the small bugs that you have. You will observe in any of the older food item, a lot of smaller bugs and worms will be moving around, right? So why is that? Because they are trying to break it up into multiple smaller or parts, multiple smaller portions. So this is where, when we talk about fragmentation, Rafia, which is the portion you want me to repeat, let me know. And ideally, I would suggest to you any doubts that you have, put it in the chat section itself. Okay. Now, fragmentation is basically breaking of organic components, materials into smaller. a detritus. You have the various organisms such as worms and bugs and some sort of insects also, which will carry out this process. In the process of breaking them, they basically will consume the organic matter. Then comes the stage of leaching. What do we mean by leaching in general? So, whenever you come across the term leaching, it basically refers to seeping of any of the liquid which is present. Any organic material will have some or the other liquid portion, isn't it? And associate it or try to identify it when you would have visited in whichever part of the country you are living in, whichever city, town, or village that you are residing in, you would have observed that there would be certain garbage dumps in your locality. Now, in those garbage dumps, at the base of it, you will find certain liquid materials which start accumulating, isn't it? Where is that coming from? So, any of the organic matter that you talk about, they will have some liquid portions. So, as the detritus or detritivores, they start breaking the organic matter into smaller components. Simultaneously, you will have various different organisms working upon them so that all the liquid portion, the liquefied portion of that organic matter, it seeps into the soil, never to be retained again. So that particular liquid will have various different nutrients, minerals as well. It is something which is given to the soil. So leaching is when the organic matter releases liquids which seep into the soil, enriching the fertility of the soil in a way. Okay, so that is what is observed as leaching. Okay, and how is it that the organic matter releases liquids? Work of microbes. That is a work of microbes. Now, then after that, we come across the portion that is catabolism. Now, catabolism and leaching, they are carried out simultaneously. Catabolism is when you have the bacterium, the fungi, etc., who are working on that organic matter, decaying organic matter. They will secrete their own enzymes to further break them down, to further, in a way, break down the various components, the complex carbohydrates which are present into simpler compounds. So, here, when we talk about catabolism, it is carried out simultaneously with leaching, where bacteria and fungi secrete enzymes to further decompose the organic matter. Okay, that is what is catabolism. Now, it is carried out simultaneously with leaching. And then you have the process of humification. Humification, conversion of the organic matter into humus. Now, this is a very slow process. Humus is what? A kind of a brown soil like feature that you have, a soil like substance that you have, which is gained, and that is rich in organic component. So, in the process of humification, whatever remaining portion of organic matter is left behind, that is further degraded and worked upon. And it is a long term process, it is a slow process in a way. And that is when it is basically converted into that dark brown humus that you find in the soil. So in this, humification is a slow process where the organic matter is converted into a dark brown amorphous. Amorphous means it can take any shape, soil like state known as humus. This is known to be increasing the fertility of the soil because organic component, when it is present in the soil is said to become much more fertile. And then you have mineralization. Mineralization is the final stage of decomposition, where even this humus that is broken down by the various different microorganisms, and the organic components, they are broken into inorganic materials and they are returned to the soil. So at the end of mineralization, you will not have any organic compounds which are left. At the end of humification, you have organic compounds, but when mineralization is carried out, no organic compounds are left. So what is this mineralization again? Returning of minerals to the soil, breaking of the organic minerals into the inorganic components. So what is the difference between organic and inorganic components? So for example, when you consider, let's say, carbon dioxide, that is going to be an inorganic component, isn't it? Water vapor, inorganic component. Carbohydrate, organic component. So carbohydrate will be broken down into, let's say, some portions of water, some portions of carbon dioxide as well. So that is where all the organic compounds are finally broken down into individual elemental state and are returned to the soil. So this is where organic compounds are further broken down to be returned as inorganic components into the soil. So in this stage, no organic compound is present. Okay? No organic compound is present in this state. So these are the various stages in which decomposition is carried out. Now here, let us apply logic to understand certain conditions. And UPSC had asked a question in 2023 based upon this particular idea and based upon this particular simple concept. So if I ask you a condition A, I give you two different regions. I give you a region A, which is having which is significantly warm, high rainfall, and compare it to B, which is cold, drier in comparison to A. Where is it that you will find that the rate of decomposition is higher? A or B? Let me know. A, perfect. Now, let us replace this, or let us first of all think about or develop the concepts in this as well. So A, the rate of decomposition is very high. We all agree to that, right? All of us, we agree to that, that in A, the rate of decomposition is very high. Now, in that entire process of decomposition, at the end of it, do you have an organic component left in the soil? No. At the end of it all, the soil is basically bereft of any kind of organic material whatsoever. The soil will only have the inorganic nutrients which are present, isn't it? Now, let me diversify this. Let us broaden this. So, or rather, if I talk about A and B, and if I ask the question that where soil will be rich in organic compound, in organic compound, out of A and B, where do you think soil will be significantly rich in organic components? A or B? Avni correct. Gulam correct. Sridevi incorrect. Inderpreet correct. Akshay correct. Kishan, Sundaresh, Pavitra, Kunal, Sudhanshu, and Binita, you are incorrect. So understand the question again. Thaya correct. Understand the question again, which I'm trying to frame. Out of A and B, where we have seen that at A, the rate of decomposition is very high. The rate of decomposition is very quick, right? So the process of decomposition takes place at an accelerated rate. You have to understand that the process of decomposition ends with mineralization. And in the case of mineralization, what do we have? No organic compound is present because all of them are returned as inorganic components. So, in case of A and B, we had seen that A is where the rate of decomposition would be higher. So, the soil would be rich in organic component in which condition? A or B? It would always be in the case of B. B will have the soil rich in organic component. Why is that? Because in A, rate of decomposition would be so very fast that eventually all of the material, organic material would be recovered as inorganic components. Inorganic components mean no organic compound there. Whereas in the case of B, because the rate of decomposition is slower, that means there is a continued process or a slower process in which catabolism is carried out, a slower process in which humification is carried out. So, in the soil, at any particular point of time, you will have the predominance of what? You will have a predominance of organic component, isn't it? So, that is why when we come across a situation when the rate of decomposition is slower, soil is going to be rich in organic components. Is there any doubt which exists here up till now? Please let me know. Any doubt which prevails till now? Good. Now, if I give you two geographical areas, that will bring me to the question that UPSC had asked this year. So, if I give you two geographical areas, one is, let's say, a tropical rainforest. Tropical rainforest. Other is a temperate grassland. Out of these two, where do you think soil will be significantly rich in organic compound? Tropical rainforest or a temperate grassland? Where do you think soil will be rich in organic compound? Think about it. Avni, perfect. Sudhanshu, correct. Sridevi, correct. Binita, correct. Kishan, incorrect. Gulam, correct. Sajan, correct. Ayushi, Kunal, you are incorrect. Okay. So, the soil will be rich in organic compound. Where? In the region of temperate grassland. Why? Because in the region of tropical rainforest, the rate of decomposition is very fast, right? Here, the rate of decomposition is going to be very, very fast. So, any organic material which is there, it will immediately be decomposed and returned as inorganic components into the soil. So, at any point of time when you take a look into the soil, it will be deprived of organic compound. Whereas in the case of the grassland, because the rate of decomposition is slower, the soil will always have some or the other organic compound undergoing decomposition. Okay, I hope that is understood. That is why tropical rainforests, they are very poor in organic compounds. So here, rate of decomposition is very high. Of decomposition is very high. As a consequence of that, you have soil is deprived of organic component, because all of the organic component will undergo mineralization very quickly and be returned as inorganic compounds. Is that understood? Or is there any doubt which prevails? Soumya, but sir, rice is paddy grain. So, yes, rice is paddy grain, but how is that relevant to the discussion that we are having? Rice is extracted from paddy, but then how is it relevant to the discussion that we are having as of now? Or is it something that you had a eureka moment just now that rice is paddy grade? Understood. Therefore, Binita, therefore, in Western Ghat and Northeastern area of India, soil will lack humus. Yes. This is the exact question that UPSC had asked in this year's prelims, where many of the candidates, they simply said and discarded this question as UPSC is asking random questions now. No. Even if you take a look back at the previous sessions that we have had, the previous live sessions that we have discussed this in significant detail, that why region of tropical rainforests, the soil is very, very poor in organic compound, primarily because the rate of decomposition is very high. Okay, so it is from these concepts that questions can be derived from and will be derived from. Okay, now after this, we move ahead to the various different abiotic factors. Abiotic factors basically refer to the non-living components, which end up influencing the ecosystem. Right. Now, in the abiotic factors, you have various different conditions. You have temperature, water, light, soil condition, etc., which ends up determining where a particular species will be living or so on. So, we'll be taking a look at this, but before that, we take a break and we come back after the break. So, we'll take a 15 minutes break here and then we'll come back after the break. So, let's take a break and then Kunal, okay, you have a doubt. I'll solve those doubt and then take a break. Reason behind it is the humid conditions of rainforest. Yes, the warm conditions and very high amount of rainfall. That mean in case of monsoon season, the organic matter of our garden poise also reduces. No, because the monsoons, they will prevail only for some duration. Kunal, understand that monsoons will be existent only for some duration, and after in that duration they will provide the moisture which will encourage the rate of decomposition. But then when you have the conditions prevalent throughout the year, then what you will have, that rate of decomposition is high throughout the year, isn't it? So in the month of the monsoon you have high rate of decomposition. So do one thing, leave any of your worn clothes that you have already worn, leave it outside during the monsoon condition, not outside in the rain, but let's say outside on a table or somewhere. Very quickly you will find that the cloth starts giving out a very unique smell. Then after that there will be development of fungal species. Why? Because decomposition of the organic compound is happening. What is the organic compound in your cloth at that point of time? It can be the fabric, it can be the sweat, the perspiration, everything. So that is where the rate of decomposition is dependent on the condition. And if the same conditions prevail throughout the year, rate of decomposition can be very, very high. Okay. I hope that is understood, Kunal. So now we take a break. We take a break for 15 minutes and we'll be back. Uh, Kishan, in geography class, you said shedding of leaf led to decomposition and enrich the soil nutrition. Yes. So, leaf also, which falls down, that is also basically the organic matter. Now, in the case of the tropical rainforest, it is fed by all the various organisms immediately. It is broken by the organisms within the span of an hour. So, that rate of decomposition is very, very quick. Okay. So let us take a break and be back in 15 minutes and we continue with the portion of abiotic factors and the adaptations which the species indicate. A confirmation about the audio, please. If the audio is clear and available, kindly confirm the same. Thank you. So, is the PPT not available to you guys from the link which is provided? Is there an issue with the PPT? Soumya and Sridevi, both of you, please let me know. Okay. So about the PPT, it is available on the link which is provided in the portal itself. So you should not be able finding any difficulty in that. Okay, if you're not getting it, then I'll look into it at the time of the lunch break that we will take. I'll take a look into it and ensure that it is provided to you. Okay. Now coming to the portion of abiotic factors. And when we talk about abiotic factors, abiotic means non-living. Biotic means something which has got life in it. So when we talk about abiotic factors, this refers to the non-living components which influences what kind of organisms, species, etc. can end up living in any particular area. Okay. So in any region, in any area, the species, they are typically dependent on the availability of sunlight, the availability of water, the availability of perfect temperature, and also the various salinity conditions of the soil, whether the soil is alkaline, whether the soil is acidic. That also ends up determining the types of plants and animals that you encounter in any region. So, starting with, first of all, the temperature factor. Temperature is a very significant factor determining the distribution of organisms and the existence of organisms in the first place. When we talk about temperature here, think about it. A mango tree, you cannot expect the mango tree to be growing on top of the Himalayas, can you? Because the temperature condition will be very, very different there. You cannot expect a large animal like an elephant prevailing in that particular conditions of very low temperature. So, if you have certain species who are able to adapt to different temperature conditions, and you have certain species who have a very narrow window when it comes to temperature tolerance that they experience. So, basically, based upon this, think about, let's say, us humans. Now, we humans, we are able to regulate our own body's temperature in a way whereby we can handle the conditions of different outside temperature. For example, during the summer months, when it is very, very hot outside, you would have experienced that we start sweating. Perspiration is something which is very predominant. And that sweat is, why is it that we sweat? So when there is perspiration or when there is that sweating action which takes place, all that sweat eventually evaporates. And evaporation of sweat provides a kind of a cooling process, right? So in general, you would have also experienced in your day-to-day life that when you come outside or come from outdoors suddenly in the summer season and you sit in front of a fan. Now, what does the fan do? The fan in itself is not the provision of cold air. Fan in itself ensures that there is a quick evaporation of all the sweat, and that cools down the body. So that is body's own way to handle high temperature or hot conditions. Then when we talk about the winter condition, when it is very, very cold, we all start shivering, isn't it? Now that shivering process is the body's mechanism to produce heat, because when you shiver, that mechanical energy gets converted into heat and the body's temperature increases. So thereby, human body is able to adapt to different conditions. Now, not all the organisms have the same capability. So accordingly, you have the classification of organisms into stenothermal and eurythermal. Stenothermal means that they are able to handle only a very precise variation or limitation of temperature. That is stenothermal, where they are able to handle a very precise range of temperature. Ability to handle or to live in very precise conditions of temperature. Take the case, for example, of various different plants. Now, any plant that you cannot keep a particular plant in the refrigerator and expect it to thrive in those conditions itself. Can you? So that is where they have a limited temperature window in which they can survive. So that is where you can change the definition of it, or you can elaborate on of the definition of it as well, that they have a very precise temperature window in which they can survive, otherwise they will perish. What is eurythermal? Regardless of the temperature changes, the body is able to handle those temperature changes and accordingly adapt itself. So, ability of the body to handle different temperature conditions by adapting the internal functioning of the body. That is eurythermal. Now, let's elaborate the concept a bit from here. Now, we have seen, or you would have studied already in the portion of geography, when we talk about in comparison to, let's say, a land area, and let's suppose we compare it to a water body, an oceanic region. Now, out of land and ocean, where is it that temperature changes quite frequently and very rapidly? What do you think? Out of land and ocean, where is it that the temperature will change very frequently and very rapidly? It will be land. Perfect. Very good. So, in a way, can we say that over the water bodies, the change of temperature is very slow, right? Or can we also say that over the water bodies, more or less the temperature is uniform? Why? Because the rate of change is very slow. Now, the organisms living in these land areas, typically, those are the organisms which will be exposed to sudden changes in temperature. Whereas the organisms living in water bodies, they are the ones who are living in consistent conditions of temperature. So that is why you will observe that marine species, they have a very limited scope of handling variation in temperature. As soon as the water temperature changes ever so slightly, that is when many of the marine organisms, they either start to die or they will move to different location. So that is where you'll find marine species, they have a limited handling capacity to the change of temperature, and mostly they will be stenothermal. Okay? So most of the marine species have limited handling capacity to temperature changes, are mostly stenothermal. Why? Because they have evolved in an area, they have significantly adapted and lived in an area where the temperature has been always consistent. So that is why the slightest variation in temperature will initiate significant amount of changes in life pattern as well. Then comes the presence of water, availability of water as well. Now water is also very important factor. Without water and without availability of water, you will not have the species being able to survive. So when we talk about availability of water, not only is that very important for maintaining the fluid balance in the body, but also it is very important for carrying out the basic purposes of life. So that is why water is an important source and important factor in determining the type of living beings which will end up living in an area. Example of stenothermal, Sundaresh, you can take the case of plants, you can take the case of many of the marine organisms, and eurythermal, you can take the example as us humans. We humans have the capability to handle different temperature conditions. So humans can always be categorized into eurythermal. Okay. Now, coming to water, so it is one of the most important factor influencing the life of organisms. Now here, water also is relevant for maintaining the fluid balance, and that fluid balance is important for maintaining the salt composition, the mineral composition in the body. So important for what? For maintaining the fluid levels in the body. Fluid balance refers to the various different salts, nutrients, etc., which are present in our body system. For example, you would have experienced in your own life as well that, let's suppose, you are exposed to very hot conditions, very oppressive conditions outside. You start perspiring a lot, you start sweating a lot, and after some time you will feel that, if let's say there is no water intake, you'll feel a kind of a dizziness. And many of the times you would have seen, either in your own case or your colleagues or any of your known people, that people faint in excessive hot conditions. You would have observed that people faint, right? Why is they lose consciousness? Why is it so? Because the fluid levels in their body, they go so low, the mineral compositions thereby they are distorted by those depleting fluid levels. That is why when an individual eventually initially when they faint, what is done? Electrolytes are given to them, isn't it? Some amount of water is sprayed. Why? To maintain and bring back that fluid balance as well. Okay, I hope that is understood. So important for retaining the minerals. Now here also, when we talk about the water, now you can actually have different types of availability in terms of salt present in the water, salinity level of the water, that can end up determining the different kinds of water conditions. You have certain kinds of species which can survive in fresh water, certain kinds of species which can survive only in saline water. For example, take the case of sharks. Now, sharks are those marine species which will be able to survive only in salty and saline water. You cannot put them into the river Ganges and expect them to thrive. But because if that is the approach, that if Ganges water we can consume, why can't the sharks live in it? That is not how they operate. That is not how they will behave. So basically, even in the case of water, salinity becomes a determining factor. Okay, water salinity becomes a determining factor. Salinity is a determining factor. Now, based upon this also, you have certain species who can live only in certain salinity conditions, whether they will be surviving only in fresh water or only in saline water. But certain species won't be able to survive in both, whereas certain of them, they can survive in a variation of salinity conditions. So accordingly, you have the species being divided into stenohaline and euryhaline. So, stenohaline here refers to existence in only a narrow or only a specific kind of salinity. Whereas, when we talk about euryhaline, in the case of euryhaline, ability to exist in a wide range of salinity conditions. Right? Example here, take the case of corals. Corals cannot live in fresh water. Corals will be able to live and thrive only when the water is very saline, isn't it? So that is the example. Even the case of, let's say, large blue whales that you have, killer whales, all of them, they will be living only in the case of stenohaline. When we talk about euryhaline example, take the case of Irrawaddy dolphins. Irrawaddy dolphins. Now, these Irrawaddy dolphins, they are basically a kind of riverine dolphins that you have, which you will find to be present both in saline water as well as in fresh water. That is why in certain Himalayan rivers, you will find the presence of the Irrawaddy dolphins, but also you will find them to be present in the region around Chilika Lake, right? Chilika Lake is where you have a lot of salty water, a lot of saline water which is in existence. So that is where you will find the presence in both these conditions. Okay. Now, then is the availability of light. Light is very important factor because take the case of the plants itself. You cannot expect the plants to grow, to survive, and to thrive in a region where light is not available. And when we talk about light here the photosynthetically active radiation component, that is PAR, that becomes an important portion here. So here, plants produce food through photosynthesis, and that is not possible without sunlight. So that is where light is important. And which portion of light is relevant? You have the PAR, photosynthetically active radiation. That is where you have a significant proportion of light energy which is utilized and which determines the species and the distribution of species as well. Then comes the edific factor. Edific factor means the conditions of the soil, the topography of a region, the soil conditions in terms of its salinity, in terms of its, let's say, alkalinity. That what is, whether the soil is acidic, whether the soil is basic. Because in each of the conditions, it will be having the ability to support own specific kinds of species, isn't it? So here, when we talk about the nature and the properties of the soil, so there you have the soil and its conditions, its mineral balance, its acidity, all of those factors end up varying. So here, when we talk about that soil presence and as a role, so acidity factor, whether the soil is alkaline or acidic, or also the mineral composition of the soil, then organic components present in the soil, contained, then after that, moisture present, then after that, the depth of the soil, because in regions where the soil is very thin, the soil is very shallow, you cannot expect very large trees to be growing and prevailing in that area. In those areas, you will have restricted small amount of plants with shallow roots, which will be in presence, which will be in existence. So that is where soil also becomes a contributing factor. So as you can see, the pH value, whenever it is less than 7, it is referred to as an acidic medium. Whenever the pH value is more than 7, it is referred to as the alkaline condition. Now, these abiotic factors that we have discussed. Now, these abiotic factors, they keep on changing across the entirety of the planet, and also in between, in the same region, across various different seasons. So all these abiotic factor, they are prone to frequent changes. Okay. So again, I would say, Samriddhi, please take a look into the link which is provided in the portal itself. You will get the PPTs there itself. Okay, try to access the PPTs from there. Now, all these abiotic factors, they are prone to change. They frequently keep on changing. In the same region also, they keep on changing, and in between different areas, obviously there would be a change. Now, whenever there is a change in these factors, how is it that the species react? There can only be a certain limited formats in which the species would react to that change. For example, in any particular region, let's suppose the availability or the temperature suddenly it changes, it increases, it decreases, or whatever happens. Now, there can only be a certain set of reactions which can be possible. So let us take a look at the reactions which the species indicate, or the actions that they undertake whenever there is a change in abiotic factor, that is your surrounding condition. And this, you can always again use an analogy that I always say, that in order to understand the responses to changing abiotic factors, the easiest analogy is, think about it from a human point of view. Let's suppose you as an individual, let's suppose you get elected or you get selected for the civil services. Now, you have been born and brought up in a particular kind of an environment which has, in a way, determined the personality that you have. Let's suppose you are an individual who is who significantly gets very impatient whenever they see anything around them not happening as per their will. You will have many of such people where even if the delivery of food gets delayed by 5 minutes, immediately they will start panicking and they will start tweeting directly to the PMO, let alone the food delivery company. So you have different kinds of people. Now, once you get selected in the civil services, you have been born and brought up in a kind of a system where corruption is something that you have never even witnessed. And straight away, you are taken up and put forward in a district where, right from the block level to the talukdars to even the ministers and the MLAs, everybody is corrupt. So the conditions around you have suddenly changed. Now there can only be a set conditions or certain types of reactions that you would indicate. Either you would also change according to the conditions, that if the condition basically promotes being corrupt, what is the harm in being corrupt in that case? So you also change. Or you are so very stringent and you are so very predetermined that I will not let this happen. You are ready to perish in that particular effort, that it is better to resign from the services than to witness this. There are people like that as well. So that will be another kind of reaction. Another form of reaction will be that, okay, this cadre, let's say West Bengal cadre is something which has been allocated to me. West Bengal cadre and its working is not suiting. So I will change my cadre. So you shift somewhere else. Or what you will do is you will wait for some time. Let these harsh circumstances around me prevail and then pass by. And then I will carry out my own work for which I entered into civil services. So these can be the only set of reactions that you can offer, isn't it? Similarly, when we talk about the species also end up reacting only in certain ways. What are the ways in which the species will react? First of all, it is regulate. Regulate means you have the ability to handle your own internal body temperature and water requirements based upon the external conditions. As I told you, during summer conditions, during summer seasons, we sweat a lot. Why? Because that sweat, when it evaporates, it is a natural cooling process for the body. During the conditions of, let's say, an acute water shortage, the body will retain as much water as possible, isn't it? When your body is short of water, when you are in a dehydrated phase, you won't feel the urge to urinate or go to the washroom so frequently, is it? Because the body is trying to retain the water. So, very certain limited number of species, mostly mammals, they have the ability to maintain their own internal body temperature and internal fluidic requirement. That is what is referred to as homeostasis. Homeostasis is the maintenance of ideal internal body temperature and fluid requirement. And that is done by their own behavioral means, where they are able to, in a way, withstand or modify their internal body and water conditions. Right? Now, all birds and mammals and very few lower vertebrate and invertebrate species are able to or are capable to do so. So, if I have to chart it out, let's suppose when I talk about, let's say, outside temperature, right? And water availability, let's suppose. Now, it might end up changing. The water availability, the temperature outside might end up changing. But when you have those organisms which are able to regulate, they will be able to maintain the temperature, they will be able to maintain the availability of water at consistency. So, the ones which regulate organisms, and there you have ability to maintain internal or homeostasis. That is internal temperature and internal fluidic requirement. This is one of the reasons why you will find that amongst the species who are dominating the entirety of the global food chain, majority of them will be mammals. Mammals are the ones which are very predominantly to be found. Why? Because these mammals, over a period of time, they have been able to adapt themselves, they have been able to regulate their body and handle the changing conditions accordingly. You have endless species of plants, etc., which have gone extinct with the slightest of the change of water availability and temperature conditions, but not is the same case which is observed in mammals. Mammals are able to retain that. So that is basically the abiotic factor here. Okay. Now, then you have certain set of species which simply conform to the change. Conform to the change means that their own internal body temperature and fluid content also varies with the outside condition. Now, what will this lead to? Will the species be able to survive with this condition, or will the species die when the internal body temperature and water requirement changes suddenly? What do you think? What will happen to the species? Correct? They will die, isn't it? So that is where majority of the species, they are conformists. Conformist means that almost 99% of the animals and almost all the types of plants, there you will find that with a change in outside temperature and water requirement, the internal temperature and fluid content also changes. As a result of that, the species are unable to adapt and perish quickly. Yes, Himanshu, that is correct. So you have many of the cold-blooded animals who basically are not able to regulate their internal body temperature. So this is something which you will observe in almost all the various different types of plants, almost all of them, that they are not able to change the conditions of temperature or water requirements. If that would have been the case, the plants would be able to grow in almost all the conditions, but that is not the case. So that is why all these species eventually, when the conditions become very, very harsh, they will perish. Then you have another reaction, and that is to migrate. You move to a different location till the conditions are harsh. You move to a different location and then you come back when the conditions become suitable again. Now this migration, long term migration and large distance migration, primarily it is carried out by various different species, but majorly it is carried out by the bird species. So the birds are the prime migrants that you will observe, that you will experience. Okay, so here majorly observed by the birds, but not only restricted to them, right? Observed by terrestrial and marine species as well. Okay, for example, take the case of a Siberian crane. Now that also ends up migrating. In India, you will find that especially during the winter months, a lot of various different birds from the region of Central Asia, northern part of Asia, they will migrate to the small ponds, lakes, reservoirs in India. Why? Because during these months the conditions in their own original home, that becomes very harsh. It becomes very, very cold. Everything is covered in ice, so availability of food is almost negligible. For example, you have the Siberian crane, which significantly feeds on the small fishes. Now, when you have a condition where the small ponds they get frozen, where will they get the availability for those fishes? They will not have the availability. So that is why they migrate to the regions such as India, where they have a better availability of food and better condition as well. Overall, the birds in general, they move through a certain set directions when they migrate. It is not as if the sky is open available to all of us. I will fly in the region that I want, I will take my own different direction. No, you will find that the birds, they follow a kind of a route. There is a kind of a migration pattern all the way from the region of Central Asia, somewhere, sometimes till the region of Australia, sometimes across the region of Pacific, across the region of Americas. So those are what are referred to as the flyways. So when you hear about the term flyways, refers to the path followed by migratory birds to escape harsh conditions at home. Now, how many flyways are there in the world? Any guesses? Or any of us having any idea about that? So, in total, across the globe, you have eight different flyways, out of which three of them they end up passing through partially or entirely through India. So, in total, you have eight different flyways across the globe. Three of them pass through India. Central Asian Flyway, East Australian Flyway being amongst them. Okay. Now, we will study later on in the later modules when we study about the conservation of species and the conservation of biodiversity. There we'll make ourselves familiar to the fact that for the conservation and protection of these migratory species of birds, it is important to protect them and to ensure protection even in the areas where they are migrating into. For example, take the case of one of those critically endangered bird species, that is sociable lapwing. It is critically endangered. Now, this sociable lapwing is a small bird the size of a sparrow in general, slightly larger than that. Now, this is to be found typically and originally in the region of Central Asia. That is where they have their predominant and abundant numbers. Now, these birds would migrate to the wetlands and the lakes in the region of Rajasthan and Gujarat during the winter season, where you have had a comparatively, even in winter, in the region of Central Asia, it gets completely frozen. Whereas in the region of Gujarat, Rajasthan, it is cold, but it is not so cold that everything gets frozen. So they had been migrating there for a long time. They still do. But then after some time, it was found out that their numbers are depleting very fast. And that is when they were put into the portion of critically endangered. Now, once we found out that their numbers are decreasing quickly, upon greater investigation, it was found out that many of the areas or lakes where they would migrate to, wetlands they would migrate to, many of them have basically been encroached by construction activities, or there has been pollution, dumping of solid waste which is carried out. So they are consuming a kind of an contaminated food, contaminated sources of energy, and that is impacting their health and overall population as well. So that is why conservation of these birds needs protection of them even in the areas that they migrate. It is with this that later on again we will be studying that a new convention was arrived at in the late 1970s, and that is what is also referred to as the Bonn Convention, or the Convention on Migratory Species. So the convention associated with migration and the conservation of species is Bonn Convention, or what is referred to as CMS, Convention of Migratory Species. Okay, this is for conservation of the species. which actually migrate from one region to another. Then you have another response to the changing or abiotic factor, and that is what is referred to as suspend. Now, in the case of suspend, what you end up doing is you end up extending your body's morphological actions. You suspend them. For example, even in your day to day life, when you sleep, I'm sure majority of us, 99% of us, we don't feel hungry while we sleep. For the entire duration that you sleep, you don't feel very hungry. Why? Because the body's consumption of energy has reduced so much that there is no requirement for fresh energy source, isn't it? Similarly, sometimes when the outside conditions turn out to be very harsh, where the availability of food and nutrients they become scarce, that is when the species they enter into a kind of a prolonged induced sleep, so that the body's requirement for nutrients and nourishment that significantly lowers down and goes down. So that is what is suspend. Now suspend is of various types. It is referred to, it is one type is hibernation, another type is estivation, another type is diapause. In all of this, what you do is you suspend your bodily activities as long as harsh conditions prevail. So, in higher plant, seeds and some other vegetative reproductive structures serve as means to tide over the periods of stress, right? In animals, the organisms, if they are unable to migrate, avoids the period of stress by escaping in time. So, how? They suspend their bodily activities so that the requirement of energy is reduced, so that the requirement of food and energy can be pushed. So, suspension of bodily activities such that the requirement of energy is very less or negligible. And how do they do that? Going for long periods of sleep. So here you have various different types. You have hibernation, where primarily it is carried out to escape the harsh winter conditions. That is when the species they hibernate. But it is not only restricted to winter conditions. You have certain species who have been known to migrate, who have been known to rather hibernate, even in the conditions when, let's say, there has been a forest fire. Even in those conditions, certain species are known to be hibernating. But in general, refers to, in general, long winter sleep. Polar bears are example of one of those species which hibernate. Then you have another one, that is estivation. Estivation is again a long sleep which is carried out to escape the very harsh summer conditions. That is what is estivation. Very dry condition, very hot condition, generally observed by rodents and small insects in the region of the desert areas or drier regions. So, this is in general prolonged summer sleep. Prolonged summer sleep. That is referred to as estivation. And then you also have diapause. That is carried out majorly by small microscopic organisms, where the microbes, they suspend their bodily activities for a prolonged time as long as the harsh conditions prevail outside. So generally observed in microbes such as planktons, in microbes to escape harsh conditions. Okay, so these are your various methodologies by which you can suspend your bodily activities. I hope that is clear. Now, after this, we introduce ourselves to certain basic concepts. What do we understand by ecotone? What do we understand by habitat? What do we understand by an ecological niche? All those areas we'll be taking a look into. And then we'll be moving into the concept of the aspect of food chain, food web, trophic levels, energy pyramid, ecological pyramid in general. We will take a look into it after. What do microbes do during diapause? During diapause, they are simply inactive, right? They are simply inactive. They persist and they remain in that condition. As soon as the condition again prevails, or let's suppose due to some, let's take the case of planktons. Now, the planktons, phytoplanktons in particular, they require the availability of sunlight to thrive. Now, let's suppose they have been brought by ocean currents into the region where again there is a sunlight. So, again, they will wake up and they will carry on their the various different morphological processes that are required. That is something which is carried out. Okay, I hope that is understood. Now, ecotone. What do we understand by the term ecotone? So, different ecosystems, they will have their own individual characteristic conditions. For example, if you consider a region such as a forest, let's suppose a region such as a forest, right? Now, forest will have density of trees, high density of trees, lot of green substance, lot of production is done. So it has got its own unique characteristic. Let us consider another ecosystem, that is a desert. Now, a desert will have its own unique characteristic, dry condition, temperature to the extremity, either very high or very low, but overall availability of moisture is almost negligible. Now, in these cases, let's suppose from a forest, you have to go to a desert. Is it going to be a condition that till here you have dense trees, and from here, suddenly you have the desert and all the sand which is lying around? No, you will have a gradual transition, that the density of trees starts reducing. Then you will find one or two or three or four odd trees lying here and there. And then eventually it will lead to a sandy desert, isn't it? So that transition zone between the two different ecosystems, that is what is referred to as an ecotone. Okay. So transition zone between the two ecosystems. That is what is referred to as ecotone. So, for example, in between the forest and you have deserts on the other side, in between these two, you will come across the presence of grassland ecosystem. Grassland will be an ecotone. Why grassland? Because grasslands basically will have few trees here and there, sporadically distributed, lot of grasses, right? So from forest, from dense trees, you have come to a region where you have grasses and trees, and then you eventually come to only grasses, eventually leading to a desert. Now, these ecotones, they are very significant because that is where you have very unique kinds of species that you find, which you might not even find in individual ecosystems. So you have very unique kind of species that you end up finding there. For example, when we talk about a dense forest, in a very dense forest, do you find deer population? Very dense forest. You don't find deer population in very dense forest. Do you find deer population in significant majority when you are talking about desert? Not at all. But in grassland, you will find many such herbivores such as deers. Similarly, elephants. In the very densest of the dense forest, you won't find the presence of elephants. In the deserts, you don't find the presence of elephants. But in the grassland ecosystem, you will find the presence of elephants as well, isn't it? So, just like that, when we talk about the ecotones, many of the times they house certain species which are unique to only that ecosystem. They are not to be found anywhere else, right? So, that is why ecotones are very important environmentally and ecologically. Another example, as is listed here. So, take the case when you have, let's say, a region where a river flows, a region where, let's suppose, there is a flow of a river. Now, this is where aquatic species will live, or this is the aquatic ecosystem. This is what is a terrestrial ecosystem. Now, in between these two, any of the time that you would have ventured to a river bank or that you would have witnessed a river bank, you would have observed that right next to the river, there's a kind of a marshy area, right? You would have noticed that there's a kind of a marshland, a marshy area. So, this region, that is what is marshland. Marshy means lot of mud, lot of saturation with water. Soil is oversaturated with water. You will have very unique kinds of worms, bugs, insects, etc., which won't be able to survive in continuous presence of water, which won't be able to survive in completely dry condition, but which will be living in these marshlands. So that is what is an ecotone. Okay. When we talk about now, I am assuming all of us have studied or covered the portion of geography. Can you give me an example of an ecotone when you talk about, let's say, the continent of Africa? Can you give me an example of ecotone in Africa? Savannah, very good. Himanshu, beautiful. So the entirety, Sahel region, very good, beautiful. So the entirety of the Sahel region that you observe immediately to the south of Sahara Desert, and that continues even in the region of Kenya, Masai Mara area, Tanzania, Serengeti region. Now, that is an ecotone because as you go south in or in the central portion of Africa, you have dense forest, rainforest in the region of Congo. You have desert in the region of Sahara. In between them, around the Sahel region, extending all the way till the area of the savannas that you find in Masai Mara, Kenya, in the region of Serengeti in Tanzania, all of that is nothing but that transition zone. So that is what is required to be understood. And the new questions, the new patterns of questions that UPSC is framing in the civil services prelims requires you to apply that logic, that where is it that it is applicable, the concept that you have studied, where is it applicable across the globe. Okay. Now, here, examples of ecotones, you have marshlands, then mangrove forests. Where is it that you find the mangroves? They are partially submerged in the coastal waters as well. It is across the coastline that you will find the mangroves, isn't it? They are partially submerged, partially on the terrain. So, very good example of Sundarbans there. So, that is again an ecotone. then grasslands between desert and forest, estuaries between the fresh water and saline water. I hope we are aware about estuaries. Any of us who has a doubt or who is not clear about estuaries, please feel free to ask. Okay. So, okay, fair enough. I will recap it very briefly. So, when we talk about estuaries, these are those areas where you have the seawater mixing with the fresh water of the river, where the seawater comes inwards and mixes with the fresh water of the river. So, these estuaries also, now, there in that ecotone, you'll find a variety of species from freshwater to saline conditions. All the variety of species you'll find to be present in that region of estuaries. Now, all of these are basically examples of ecotones and characteristics. It might be wide, it might be narrow. In general, it is a zone of tension because there is a zone of transition where the conditions will be changing from one ecosystem to the other ecosystem. One thing that you have to note from your prelims perspective is that it can be natural and it can be man-made as well. Ecotones can be man-made as well. They can be artificial as well. For example, when we talk about the ecotone between an agricultural field and a forest, that is a man-made ecotone. That is where immediately you will observe that many of the forested areas, they have been cleared out and there are various different agricultural fields. Now, ideally, they serve as an ecotone. Now, that is why in many of such agricultural fields close to the forest, you will find that frequent visits by elephants and the other wild animals takes place. Elephants, they are not interested in the crops that you grow. They are basically interested in that ecotone because that reminds them of the grassland ecosystem that they are so habituated with. So that is what is a characteristic of an ecotone. Now, then we come across to another concept which is referred to as the edge effect. What do we understand by edge effect? So basically, the change in population which is observed or the change in community structure which is observed at the boundary of the two ecosystems or the habitats. So in between the ecosystems, the region of the ecotone, generally you will find that there are greater number of species living in the region of ecotone, because not only will you have species being able to adapt to the individual ecosystems, you will have your own unique species which can survive only in those ecotones itself. So basically, there is a greater number of species, greater a number of species found in the region of ecotones, and that is known as edge effect. Okay, so greater number of species, they are generally to be found in the region of ecotones in comparison to the individual ecosystem, and that is what is edge effect. Okay, the species found here are edge species. Example, elephants found in ecotones like grasslands. Okay, so that is what is referred to as edge effect. Now, then coming over to the difference between habitat and niche. What do you understand when you talk about habitat, and what do you understand when we talk about niche? Now, this is a new topic, so we'll do one thing. We'll cover it after the break. So we take a lunch break and we'll be covering this particular topic after the lunch break. So, any doubts that we have till now, any of the doubts that we have till now, feel free to ask. No doubts? Edge effect. Okay. So, edge effect is basically, in simple terms, think about it. We have seen the various ecosystems. Let's suppose we talk about forest. Let's suppose we talk about a grassland, or rather desert. This is your ecotone. Now, this in this ecotone, in this portion that is on the forested side, you will also be able to find certain species that you find individually in the forests. For example, certain species of insects, certain species of, let's say, monkeys, certain species of apes, you will find to be present in this region, right? Which ideally are to be found in the forested location. You will find certain species of reptiles, certain species of insects that you find in the desert area as well, isn't it? Certain plant species. For example, take the case of khejuri, palas, all these are the kinds of trees that you find even in the region of the desert. These are the trees that you find in the immediate boundary of the desert as well. So you will not only have the species which can live in these individual environment, but you will have your own individual species as well, unique species. So these are your species to be found, species which are typically found in the forest, found in forest ecosystem. This is species found in desert ecosystem. Then you have unique set of species found in ecotone. So overall, many of the times, the number of species that you are able to find in the ecotone is larger in terms of the species diversity we are talking about. That is larger than the species found in individual ecosystem. That is what is referred to as edge effect. Number of species is higher. So that is what is referred to as edge effect. Is that understood? Kindly let me know. Avni, what was the graph you made of water availability? So that is about the regulation, the species who are able to regulate. How are they able to regulate? So it is about that, where the outside temperature keeps on changing, increasing or reducing. The water availability keeps on changing or reducing. Here, the maintenance of temperature, that is consistent. Maintenance of water requirement, that is consistent. So these are only a few of the species. Majority of the species you will find, the conformists, they are the ones where the body temperature changes as with the outside temperature, and so does the availability of water requirement. So these are the conformists. They perish. Okay, I hope that is understood. So let's take a break now, and we'll be back at 2. So this is a lunch break that we will have, and we'll be back at 2, and that is when we continue. Okay. There's a live call request which is coming. Rafia. Okay. Yes. Am I
Sir, are you
audible?
hearing me? Yeah, sir.
Yes, Rafia,
Actually,
you
वो
are audible.
आपने
Please go ahead.
yeah. One second, ना sir. One second. There is a sound problem is here. One second. Yeah, sir. आपने वो डिफॉर्मेशन के बारे में बताया था ना, रेडिएशन ऑफ प्लांट्स के बारे में बिफोर ऑफ 11. No, no, not this one. Not this one. No, no, no.
Before this,
Did yeah, this one. Not back. Yeah, this one. The second topic I didn't understand that.
decompose,
Yeah.
leaching. Okay, I'll take it up. So leaching, basically understand what is leaching. So whenever you have
Okay.
any organic compound which is getting decomposed, any of the organic compound. So generally you will find that whatever amount, now organic compound is made up of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, etc. Now all those organic compounds, they will secrete some liquid, some fluid as they
Okay.
are undergoing decomposition. Now outside in the environment, those materials, when they are, let's suppose, take the case of a forest. In a forest, let's suppose a species like a small elephant has died. Now initially you will have various different detritivores who will break it up
Okay.
into smaller parts. Now microbes, bacterium and fungi, when they will start working, all the fluids of that organic component or the organic leftover, that will start seeping over into the soil. That is where the organic compound is drained out of the fluids. You can take the reference of it or example of it from the normal garbage that you throw out of your house. Now the garbage that you throw, let's suppose the kitchen waste, you keep the kitchen waste outside for some time, you will observe that in whichever plastic or polythene or anything that you would have kept it, you will observe that it starts to generate,
Yeah.
secrete some liquid and fluid. So that is the fluid which is generated by organic compound as they undergo decomposition. Now, in the phase of leaching, that all that fluid seeps into the soil, never to be recharged or regained again by that organic matter. It is carried out when the decomposers, they start breaking the organic materials. That is when the liquids, they will
So
start secreting
if the
and will
question
settle
asks
down into the
about
soil.
the decomposition in the UPSC, so these topics will be helpful now to make
Mhm.
the answer and all.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. That is what I told you. That even this year you had a direct question in
Yeah,
prelims
yeah, I
asked
have
from
seen that
this
question.
particular
That's
area.
why.
And the question state
Yeah.
asked,
Yeah.
yes, about the tropical rainforest. So that question
Okay.
I will discuss after the break sometime,
Okay.
what that exact question was. But yes, in the mains also, decomposition has been asked before. So there you have to write about all the various
So
different
this will be
stages of
the
it.
example stages, and then the stages is also are there.
These are the stages by which the decomposition takes place. So let's take the case of any organic compound.
Hmm.
Let's suppose any dead leaf. Now,
Yeah.
initially, the leaf will be intact. After 2 to 3 months,
Okay.
it will not even be identifiable. So, what is the process which has elapsed in that duration? How is it that from that intact leaf, it is not something that we are unable to distinguish? That is the process. Initially broken down into small pieces, then
Okay.
liquid which will be secreted will be absorbed, then further breaking down by the
Okay.
secretion of enzymes by the microbes, then humification and return of
Okay.
minerals into the soil
So
by
I have two
the
questions more,
minerals.
sir, but I will ask you
Okay?
after the break. Sorry.
Okay. Done. Thank you. So, right. So, Sridevi's edge effect slide. Okay, I'll put the edge effect slide. Uh, I've explained edge effect here. Is it the slide that you were requesting for, or you were requesting for this particular slide? Let me know. I'll put it in this. So let's take a break now, and we'll be back by 2:05. Okay? 2:05 is when we'll be back, and we will continue.